Hey there, y'all. This is Juliette Miranda. You are listening to episode 94 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Get those glasses out, y'all, and fill them up with something delicious. It is time for a toast. Cheers, y'all. Oh, yum. I have a very celebratory kind of bourbon in my hands today, and that is because I have a fantastic episode I cannot wait to share with y'all. But first, let me tell you about this great bourbon. This is Orphan Barrel Barterhouse. This is a 20-year bourbon, and it is absolutely outstanding. Now, I've gotten a little bit of conflicting information about the mash bill of it, but I can tell you that this is a very high corn bourbon, probably about 80% or so. Otherwise, it's got malted barley and rye in it. And like I said, it's been aged for 20 whole years. I'll tell you right up front, it is not quite as oaky as you would expect. Oh, it's there all right. You can definitely taste that woody sort of flavor. But this is a much sweeter bourbon than I expected. Take a couple more sips and it's going to evolve into a very deep caramel sort of bourbon. Lots of orange honey, a little bit of cherry, and it finishes with cinnamon. It's definitely sweet, a little bit spicy. This Orphan Barrel Barterhouse bourbon is delightful. And it is the perfect complement to today's episode because I am talking with two tremendous talents, Lea Thompson and director Jim Hemphill. Now, y'all know Lea Thompson. She has been in some of the most defining movies of the 80s, including Back to the Future and Some Kind of Wonderful, as well as a whole lot of TV shows like Caroline in the City and Switched at Birth. So today we're going to be talking about her career, about what it's like to be a woman working in the film industry today, and we're going to be focusing on two of her very recent projects. The movie, The Year of Spectacular Men, which was directed by Lea and stars her daughters, Zoe and Madeline Deutsch. And we're also going to be talking about the movie, The Trouble with the Truth. Y'all, I gotta say, The Trouble with the Truth is an amazing movie. And Lea tells us that it's one of the most challenging roles she's had. And before we go into the interview, I just want to say thank you to the guys over at Following Films Podcast. It is because of them that I learned about this project and was able to connect with Lea and with the director of the movie, Jim Hemphill. But more on him a little later. First, we're going to hear from Lea Thompson. Hi there, this is Juliette.
Hi, Juliette. This is Lea Thompson.
Hi, it's great to speak with you.
Nice to speak with you, too.
I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, me too. I'm very excited. I loved listening to your stuff.
Oh, why, thank you. What I actually wanted to do was start off by talking about the independent movie, Trouble with the Truth. You play a writer who is reconnecting with her ex-husband over dinner. Now, the movie plays out as a conversation that you both have, and it's so much like a stage play. What I would like to know is, how did you get involved in the project?
Sometimes it's like a miracle when a great part comes across your computer and you've never heard of it. You didn't fight for it, you didn't audition for it, but it was offered to me, and I read it and I was immediately transfixed. It was such a great script, such a scary part to play because it really is just these two actors talking. So you really have to hopefully create a compelling relationship and a compelling character to keep the audience's interest. I like to do things that scare me, so I said yes after a very brief conversation with Jimmy Hemphill, who's the writer and director of the piece.
Well, and you have experience in doing work on Broadway, so this must have really been terrifying, but it must have felt really good too.
Well, it's definitely an actor's piece, and a writer-director piece. I mean, it wasn't so much about the visual. That's unusual. And the way that Jimmy so smartly decided to shoot it basically in sequence, which is unusual. Usually you jump around in the script. We shot, in order. And so that helped us to give a more like a play, that kind of performance, because we kind of knew what we did before and that we could build on it. It's actually really confusing and difficult for actors because we always are out of sequence. And, a lot of times you have to shoot the last scene of the movie first, which is ridiculous. Like, you don't know anything about it.
Well, and I don't think people really realize that the movie doesn't come together as you see it on the screen. So this must have given you a chance to really organically develop the emotions that you go through.
Yeah, and also Jimmy did this beautiful thing where he shot with two cameras in something that they call cross coverage, which means that, and this is very unusual for features and even TV, where you're shooting his close up at the same time you're shooting my close up. So what's great about that is that when you're acting, when it's not like that, you have to try to do the same thing on both sides. So you have to try to remember what you did 3 hours later when they turn the camera around. And so it makes you a little more stiff. But when you get to do cross coverage like this, you can improvise, not necessarily with the words, but you can improvise with the emotions. So, one take you could say one line and laugh, and the next take you could say the same line and cry, and it would work because both actors are reacting to the same thing at the same time. So that's the way he shot it, with two cameras and did cross coverage. It was really freeing for us as actors. John Shea, who plays my ex-husband, is a wonderful actor and also a stage actor, so he wasn't daunted by doing 10, 11 pages a day or 12 pages, whatever we did. I can't remember, but it was a long takes we did, really long.
But you guys have such great chemistry together. It really felt as though you were in this relationship. It really just felt natural.
Thank you. And that was really unusual. We had no rehearsal, zero rehearsal. We didn't even do a read-through. And John Shea and I really didn't know each other. He had played my husband in a mini-series called A Will of Their Own. But he played my husband, but we really didn't have very many scenes together. And I wasn't supposed to like him. It was like an arranged marriage or something like that. I didn't have that strong of a notion about who he was from that experience, but I'd actually been at a party with him like 6 months before this movie came up, and I had a lovely conversation with him, and we talked a lot about the theater and his theater group, and somehow it stuck in my head when we were trying to find someone to play my husband really quickly because we didn't have any time to cast the part. I just remembered the feeling that I had from him, how available, how hardworking, how much he was still an actor. Like he still loved being an actor. Sometimes when people get to be our age, they're like have been beaten down by the process so much that they're not like in love with acting anymore. And I could tell he still really was. Oddly enough, one of the first names that turned it down was D.W. Moffat, who played my husband for 6 years after, played my husband on TV. Anyway, it turned out to be a happy accident that the second person we asked to do the movie was John Shea, who was just an amazing actor. So good. Isn't he good in that movie?
He is. Just the way that he smiles in the movie, I always interpret it as being one way, but then it meant something else. It was so cool to see.
He's so good. Like, it's upsetting to me that more people didn't see this movie because that's one of the great performances of the year that movie came out. He was incomparably good. It's funny how those things happen where, some movies get really seen out of nowhere and then most movies just don't. Thank you for getting the word out.
Of course. You have a really unusual sort of character in this movie, and that's really what attracted me to it so much, was that she's just so multifaceted. We see you go through these little revelations that kind of start creeping out a little bit, and by the end, your character is in a way a little bit unlikable, just in how we learn what she's doing. You don't see that kind of role for women in film these days at all.
No, it's a completely fully realized human being, and Jimmy gave me a clue to this when he went in a Q&A I did with him where he talked about how he wrote this movie in an unusual way. Like he wrote the dialogue and kind of assigned it later to the different characters. So what ends up is a much more interesting characters when you're not like, well, women talk like this and men talk like this. So it actually feels so much more real. I've lived in the constraints of playing a mother for 33 years now. I've been playing the mother of a 17-year-old for 33 years. So my entire career I've played mothers, and there's so many constraints. Mothers should be like this, and if they're like that, they're bad moms. If they're like this, they're good. But no, mothers are women. They're women that are complicated and full of their own lives. They're as varied as any group in the world. It was a really complicated character because I say some kind of really intense things. Definitely the most interesting dialogue I've ever had the pleasure of saying.
Well, how do you work through dialogue like that? How do you really develop the depth that the character has?
It's really about relying on the material, relying on your instincts at the time. You know, we had no other option. But what was interesting about our process, which is something I'd never done before, and John really helped with this, was the usual way that you shoot a movie is you come in, you get a makeup, you block the scene, which means you just kind of show everybody where you're going to be and where you're going to go. And then you go away and they light and you come back and you do that all day. With this one, we blocked and then we actually went away for 2 hours. And that's when because we had no choice, that's when we learned our lines. So John and I would just sit in a room and we would talk. We would read through the dialogue with each other probably 20 times, 25 times. In the beginning, we wouldn't know it, but it was 10 or 12 pages of dialogue. We wouldn't know it, and by the second time, we'd know more, and the third and the fourth, and by the 20th time, we'd know it, and we'd have gotten each other's rhythms, like in a play, where you get the rhythms down. You know what I mean? That's what's so great about it, and that's why we had such good rhythms together. And then we'd go in, and we'd shoot it, but because there were 2 cameras, we'd be done early every day anyway. So the 2 hours didn't cost anybody anything. But the crew would be kind of sitting around going what are we going to do? But it was kind of like a foreign film. I imagine Italian films might be like that or something. So it was really fun to shoot and exciting.
And I love that it doesn't have that traditional sort of clean-cut ending.
Yeah, it's got an interesting ending.
Yeah, it's just so different. I didn't know if I should cry or if I should feel good. It's such a thought-provoking movie.
It is. And what's interesting to me is that it's actually kind of like a thriller in a weird way. You're scared about what's going to happen. And it's just human beings in love, but we can relate to that scene where you're with someone and it could go one way or the other, and it could destroy your life, just this one thing that you did. Or I've seen the movie enough times with an audience, and they're always on the edge of their seats, what's going to happen?
It was really fantastic.
Thank you. I love the movie, too. I'm so glad you liked it. It's one of my faves, and I think Jimmy did an amazing job.
Yeah, I'll be talking with him tomorrow night. I'm really interested in hearing his perspective on just everything that he put into it.
And these things are such labors of love, when they don't have a huge infrastructure behind them or when they're really, truly independent. I just made one myself that's going to debut at the LA Film Festival, and it gave me even more respect for Jimmy. It's an individual piece of art. I mean, this is what he wanted to make. The voice is completely his. And that's a rare thing because making films and TV is such a collaborative venture. There's so many people usually involved, watering down the story or the ideas. That's why true film buffs can really get something special when they see a movie like this, because it's a single vision, a single person's idea, and that's unusual for film.
Well, and you've made the transition from acting into directing as well, so has that changed the way that you approach just the way that you handle roles or the way that you look at films now?
It definitely changes the way I look at films. Film and art and performing arts are so deeply ingrained in me. I've been on the stage since I was 9 years old. I've lived and breathed art, performing art. It's interesting for me to talk about it. Because when you do something so much, it's so just ingrained in your muscle memory Like a lot of times I say one of the great things about going to art school is that you learn how to talk about art. I do not know how to talk about art in a way that's like fascinating, or in a way that's, sounds groovy, because I've just been doing it so long. It's interesting for me to become a director, which I've been a director for 12 years, but to start to try to figure out how to talk about things, instead of just doing them. That's been the biggest challenge for me being a director. But I did have this really interesting experience with the movie that everybody always knows me from, is Back to the Future. Recently, after editing my movie for 5 months, I watched Back to the Future on the big screen because they did it with the orchestra. So it was really the first time I got to really appreciate the movie as a director. I haven't really watched it that many times, maybe 10 times in my life or something like that. I got to watch it on the big screen and really appreciate the directing. You know how when you've been doing something so long, it takes a long time to kind of explain it? I just know where to put the camera because I've been doing it so long.
I'd love to hear about your experience working with your daughters and directing them in Year of Spectacular Men.
Well, it was really exciting. I have this movie, The Year of Spectacular Men. Like I said, it's coming out on Friday at the LA Film Festival. It's part of the selection in the film festival. And yes, for 4 years, my daughter Madeline, who is now 26, have been working on this movie. So she got done with college and she had all this angst. And she's such an amazing artist. She's a musician and a writer and an actor and a comedian. And I was like, the only way my family knows how to deal with crisis is to create art with it. So I was like, write a movie. And most people say they're going to write a movie and they never do, but she did it in like a month. And it was great. And so we developed it and worked on it. And we had several different producers. And finally, I found this wonderful producing team, Parkside Pictures, and they said, okay. Because it seemed like people would say a daughter and a mom working on a movie together. That's a kind of a scary proposition. But they were all in. Also, my daughter, Zoe Deutsch, who's like a really up-and-coming movie star right now. She's in the movie as well. So it was 2 daughters and a mom working on a movie together. So it's definitely a young girl's vision of how complicated it is to love, be loved, be a sister, find your way in this world right now. It's a beautiful movie. It's really, really original, So that's what we're looking to do, something that hasn't been done before. We've all had a year of spectacular men, haven't we?
Oh, my gosh. I've had several.
Yes, exactly.
Did you ever have any uncomfortable moments directing your daughter in, a romantic kind of movie like this?
Yes. Well, because the love scenes are all hilarious, embarrassing, ridiculous. They were, yes. I was and funny enough, a good part of our budget on the CGI, our special effects budget, was spent on trying to get her pasties taken out because I was in no way, shape, or form was I going to have my daughter's bare breasts in a movie that I directed. So she had this love scene, and you could see her pasties because I was too embarrassed to run in and put the covers up. So we had to get the pasties taken out.
Oh, my gosh.
And we had to spend money on pasties. There was definitely some embarrassing things. Plus, the men in the movie, Jesse Bradford, Brandon T. Jackson, Zach Rohrig, Nicholas Braun, Abin Jogia. We have these great men who are down for making fun of themselves because obviously The Year of Spectacular Men is sarcastic. So they were amazing leading men, amazing actors, and they had to do a love scene with the leading lady's mother behind the behind the monitors. So, they deserve special mention in this disaster.
Well, how do you, as a director, put them at ease? Is there anything you can do? Is it just going to be that sort of awkward moment?
I think, they were just great professionals. But they also everyone always has this, not everyone, but a lot of people also have this added problem that I'm Lorraine McFly or whatever, that they saw me when they were kids in a movie and I was super cute, So I'm no longer that cute, believe me, but I think that's always something that people have to a lot of times people have to kind of get past that. It's definitely fun for me after all this time to really feel like I created something from the ground up and I get to see it, in its fruition. This is all my daughter's, came out of her heart and her mind, and I just tried to be there to help that vision come true. And she even wrote a lot of the music in it. She wrote 5 songs and the score. Apparently, only 1% of the movies that are ever made are scored by women, the musical score.
That's staggering, really?
1%.
What I've loved about seeing the way that your career's developed is how you really do own your roles. I mean, particularly when you take a movie like Howard the Duck, which at the time did not fare very well, but I think it's getting a resurgence. So you've always, at least as far as I've heard, said, you know what, I did it and I moved on.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not one to blame people for things either, Like, I did it. I worked hard. Did the best I can do. That's all you can count on. It's a crazy crapshoot. Everything's a crazy crapshoot. You do the best that you can. And I've got so many people love that movie. Like, who am I? They're releasing it in Blu-ray or some crazy thing. Like, somebody's buying it. They don't press those things for nothing. It's a crazy movie, and I love that my fans that are iconoclasts love that movie. So, yeah, I mean, there's got to be a reason why I didn't do if I've done one scene in a major motion picture in the last 23 years. There's got to be some reason for that, because I made so many movies that made money and that are iconic now. I don't know what that reason is. It's probably something I did, but I'm not going to dwell on it. Maybe it just is that I had babies. If you really look at it, leading ladies who actually birth babies get put in a feature film jail.
Really?
It's very weird. Yeah, look at it.
Does that change perception? I don't understand why it would.
It's really creepy. Look at it. I'm talking about leading ladies.
Sure.
If you adopt a baby, it doesn't affect you. But if you actually get pregnant and have a baby, usually you are done.
That is terrifying.
And there's very few exceptions. But it also might correlate with turning 30 or 33 or something like that.
That seems to be the magic age where things just change.
Yeah, it's brutal. Thank God for TV, because it's brutal. And it's not any better, honestly, than it was. It might be worse.
Well, I feel like all the actresses we see right now are very similar.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe. You mean in big movies and big features?
In big movies, yes, yeah. But when you look at TV shows in general, I think that's actually changing a little bit, where you're seeing a little bit more diversity. You're definitely seeing more interesting storylines than we have in a while. I mean, even thinking about Switched at Birth, what that show did in promoting awareness about deafness, it's really fascinating.
Yes, that movie did a lot for a lot of people. I hear it every single day, how important that the TV show was for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It's a real gift of our business that we can change people's perceptions and change people's prejudices and change people's feelings about themselves. That's it's a great honor and privilege, and it's one of the things that I hold so dear. Because a lot of times you think, I had this last week. I was like, what have I done with my life? I should have done so many different things. I should have, I've just been acting. And then someone came up to me and was tears in their eyes, and I had this terrible time, and my dad died, and I just kept watching Switched at Birth, and now it helped me through it. And I was like, really? Okay, that's the answer. I guess I did something with my life.
Absolutely. Well, where do you see your career going from here?
That's the cool thing about it. I don't know. I don't know. I love this business, so I'd really love to do another movie, or I'm pitching some TV series that my daughter wrote. That would be really great because we could have like maybe a longer collaborative experience where we didn't have to raise the money and try to push it out into the world. But I'd like to have another kind of build something from the ground up again, even though it's exhausting. It takes forever. But it's exciting. It appeals to my Midwestern sensibilities to build something from the ground up,
Oh, I feel that. I'm from the Midwest too.
Yeah, just like create something.
It's a great feeling just having that and being able to show it and saying, I did this.
Yeah, it is. Hopefully something like that. I'm going to do a modern adaptation of Little Women.
Oh, I love that story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful script. A beautiful young woman who wrote it and is directing it. So I'm going to go do that and direct some TV, more TV. So who knows? Sky's the limit.
I love it.
Anything can happen.
That's excellent. Lea, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I've had so much fun.
Thank you. You're so lovely, and I really appreciate you talking about The Trouble with the Truth. I think anyone who watches it will enjoy it, and I really appreciate you championing it very much. So,
of course. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I cannot thank Lea enough for her time and her openness. She has always been one of my favorite actresses, so it was a joy for me to be speaking with her. And now we're going to hear from the director, Jim Hemphill. We're going to discuss what went into writing and directing The Trouble with the Truth, talk a little bit about his first movie, the horror film Bad Reputation. But more than that, we're going to be talking about movies and Jim's passion for them. He is somebody who has tremendous respect and appreciation for what goes into filmmaking. So I think it's time, y'all. Grab that glass of bourbon or whatever you choose to have in your hand. So I think it's time, y'all. Kick back and join me in talking with Jim Hemphill. Hi there, this is Juliette.
Hey, this is Jim Hemphill.
Jim, how you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you. I really appreciate you doing this.
Of course. So, Jim, you are a screenwriter and a director and a film journalist, but I think more appropriately, I've heard you say that you are an all-around cinema enthusiast, which to me kind of sounds like the most perfect job in the world.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, that's definitely the way I think of myself. People kind of ask because over the years, I've made movies, I've written about movies, I moderate Q&As at screenings and things like that. And people kind of ask, do you think of yourself as a director or a critic or a writer? And I think enthusiast kind of sums up all of it. I mean, I love movies. I love making movies. I love talking about movies. And that's kind of the common thread in everything in my life.
Now, your second film, The Trouble with the Truth, is a very complex romantic drama. Was it your intention from the start to write a movie that is entirely driven by dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, it started from a more practical place than anything else, which is the first movie that I made before Trouble with the Truth was this extremely, extremely low budget horror movie called Bad Reputation. And it was a movie we made for, a few $1,000 with a crew of 3 people, including me. It was me, the cameraman, and the sound guy. I had never directed a movie before. The cameraman had never shot a movie before, and the sound guy had never done sound on a movie before. So that kind of tells you something about our level of experience, and our resources were very limited. And the problem with that movie, it's a movie that I like a lot in a lot of ways, but we were straining against our resources the whole time. I was trying to make essentially a sort of studio horror movie with no money and no resources. So for The Trouble with the Truth, I basically tried to learn from my mistakes. And for my second movie, I wanted to write something that I knew I could pull off, even if I didn't have a lot of money, as long as I had great actors. So, the thing that doesn't necessarily cost any more money to do well than badly is performances and dialogue. So, it was sort of intentionally written to be very character driven. Again, not necessarily so much from an artistic place as a practical place. As I knew on the one hand, I'd be able to make it relatively inexpensively. And also my hope was that, actors like to say interesting dialogue. So if I tried to put all of my energy into the dialogue and write good dialogue, hopefully I would attract a couple of good actors. And the idea was almost to kind of make it execution proof in a little bit, in the sense that as long as I had the good actors and had them saying the dialogue and got the camera aimed in their general direction, I would have a movie that worked, even if, even I couldn't screw it up, basically, was the idea.
Well, I know when I was talking with Lea the other day, she was saying that when she was reading the script, it was terrifying but incredible at the same time, just having that kind of challenge in front of her.
I mean, it was funny, Lea and John Shea, the lead actor, the first time we all sort of sat together and went through the script, which, by the way, was the first day of shooting, because we just, for a variety of reasons and circumstances, we had no rehearsal time. And I didn't even meet John until the first day of shooting. Like, I obviously knew his work, and we talked on the phone, but he doesn't live in Los Angeles where we shoot. We offered him the movie and didn't meet until the first day of shooting. So on the first day of shooting, we started the day. We basically shot a very simple scene in the movie that's a phone conversation between John and Lea that we could kind of knock out really fast. And then we sent everybody home, and John and Lea and I spent the rest of the day by ourselves going through the script and kind of rehearsing it. It was almost comical every time they would turn a page and see these incredibly long speeches. It's exactly like you say. I think they had this combination of excitement, but also, oh no, they would be relieved when they would see that the other person had a long speech that they had to give.
Considering how quick of a turnaround there was on the whole shoot, they have incredible chemistry between the two of them.
Yeah, that was kind of lucky for me. I mean, basically, the way that the movie was cast, Lea was cast first, and when she was cast, she wanted to have a lot of input in who the guy was, and I wanted her to have a lot of input in it because I knew the movie would kind of live or die on the chemistry. So, I asked her who were some people who she either had worked with or wanted to work with, who she thought would be good in the part. And one of the guys she said was John Shea, who she had done a miniseries with 10 years earlier. They had played a husband and wife in a miniseries called A Will of Their Own. Hadn't really seen each other or talked to each other that much since, but I guess maybe a couple months before we were shooting, she had run into John at a party, and they played some board game together and were kind of reminded of how much they liked each other. And that coincidence, had John in her mind. And so when she said him, I thought he was a great choice because I'd always been a big fan of his. One of my favorite movies of all time is the Costa Gavras movie Missing, which he was in. And he was in another movie called A New Life that Alan Alda directed. It was actually kind of an influence on the script for Trouble with the Truth. So as soon as she said him, I loved the idea. And when he showed up, it was, in terms of speaking to your point about the chemistry, it was kind of interesting because in a way, their real life friendship, it kind of mirrored what was going on in the movie because they hadn't seen each other in a long time. As we were shooting the movie, they were sort of refamiliarizing themselves with each other and sort of becoming friends again in the same way that the couple in the movie kind of reconnects and grows closer again over the course of the movie. So it kind of worked. It was kind of a lucky accident for me that the real life chemistry kind of worked for what I needed in terms of the chemistry on the movie. I mean, I wish I could take credit for it, but it really was just kind of just blind luck. And it had, and also Lea and John are both just, terrific actors.
Oh, tremendous. Yeah. Just the looks and the reactions that both of them have with each other is just fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because people ask sometimes if there was a lot of improvisation on the movie, and there wasn't really a lot of improvisation in terms of the dialogue. I'm not somebody who's crazy about doing a lot of improv on the set. My general belief, not just because I've written it, I mean, basically no matter who's written it, my general feeling is that, the dialogue in a script theoretically has been worked over for a long time by the writer. You're not going to, messing around on the set, come up with something that's better than what a writer has been working on for months in their office or bedroom or whatever. However, what the movie did have was kind of what Lea calls emotional improv, where her and John would play scenes differently. We would do one take where they would play it more seriously, and another take where they'd maybe be kind of laughing, and another take where Lea would be crying. And they would be saying the exact same words, but just the delivery would change the meaning of the scene. And speaking to your point, just the glances and the expressions, the way they looked at each other. I mean, they could look at each other with affection or with resentment or with happiness or whatever, and that would kind of change the meaning. So in a way, there was a lot of improvisation, just not in the way that people, traditionally mean when they say that. And so part of the task in the editing room for my editor, Benny Pierce, was he had to kind of sift through all those different ways of playing it that they did, and then kind of find the right balance. It was, we sort of in a way rewrote the movie in the editing room, even though it was almost word for word what I had written originally.
Now, Trouble with the Truth is, like you said, very different from your first movie, Bad Reputation. What made you shift gears so dramatically, going from that crazy, kind of gritty horror movie to this, which is so dramatic?
Going back to the whole thing about me being a movie enthusiast, I love all kinds of movies. Probably it probably works against me a little bit, in terms of from a practical career point of view, because I think, it's probably easier in a way to forge a career as a director if people can kind of tell what kind of director you are. I'm a little weird in that way because, I love Ingmar Bergman and Kurosawa, and I love I Spit on Your Grave and She's All That, so it's, to me, and that's kind of how I see Bad Reputation. Bad Reputation is basically a cross between She's All That and I Spit on Your Grave.
That is the greatest description I've ever heard of it. It's perfect.
Or actually the best description of that movie came from a woman who saw it. Bad Reputation played at a horror film festival in Chicago, and a woman came out of it and came up to me and said, "You should call that movie I Spit on John Hughes' Grave." And I thought that was kind of a perfect description, because that is kind of what I had in mind. I mean, basically, Bad Reputation is like Pretty in Pink meets I Spit on Your Grave with a dash of Carrie or something like that. So anyway, I guess, to me, they're both just movies that are in traditions I like. I mean, Bad Reputation came from Bad Reputation was kind of every movie I liked in a way when I was 14. It was De Palma's Carrie. There's some Wes Craven. There's some Terror Train. I mean, in a way, Bad Reputation is a little bit of a horror movie geeks movie. It's a little bit, it's a little immature in certain ways, in the sense that, everything in it is a reference to another movie. The cop character is named after Stephanie Rothman, who's one of my favorite, exploitation directors of the 70s.
It reminded me of Eli Roth a little bit, actually.
Yeah, which it's definitely in that kind of vein. And then, Trouble with the Truth also grows out of movies and traditions that I like. It's just very different ones. Trouble with the Truth is kind of, there's obviously My Dinner with Andre is kind of a touchstone, but then there's also Clint Eastwood's movie, The Bridges of Madison County, was kind of an influence on it, and Linklater's Before Sunrise and Sunset, and a lot of the movies by the Japanese director Yasujiro Ozu. Trouble with the Truth is kind of building more, I guess, on sort of an art house and American drama tradition. And the thing I wrote most recently that I want to make is a Western. So it's kind of, it really is just each time I make a movie, I'm kind of trying to put my own spin on a different genre of movie that I like. Sort of making movies that are movies I would want to see as a fan.
Well, and I think I've heard Quentin Tarantino say almost the identical thing, that he wants to make those movies that he loves.
Right.
How influenced were you by somebody like David Mamet?
Huge. I mean, I think if you do anything that's dialogue driven, it's hard in a way not to be influenced by Mamet. And certainly when I wrote Trouble with the Truth, it was, there were certain, I looked at a lot of movies that had limited locations because I wanted to see how they managed to stay cinematic while also being kind of theatrical. And so obviously one of the movies I looked at was Glengarry Glen Ross, the Mamet movie, that's one. And some of the other movies I looked at, The Breakfast Club was another one. Talk Radio, the Oliver Stone movie, although my movie is much less showy than that one. But yeah, and Mamet is always, House of Games is one of my favorite movies. And I think Mamet as a screenwriter wrote maybe the most perfect screenplay anybody's ever written, which is The Verdict, the Sidney Lumet movie. I mean, I think that is about, I think that movie hits a sweet spot. It's much harder to accomplish than I think it looks, which is that The Verdict is simultaneously a movie that really delivers the goods as a kind of mainstream, crowd-pleasing Hollywood movie, but also is very adult, very intelligent, a great character study. I mean, the Paul Newman character in that movie is sort of one of the great screen characters of all time. It's very distinctly a David Mamet movie and a Sidney Lumet movie and a mainstream crowd pleaser all at the same time. And yet, with all those things, it has a kind of unconventional ending that it didn't even occur to me until just now, but I think I ripped off for Trouble with the Truth completely subconsciously. I wasn't even thinking about it when I wrote it, but I just realized that it ends almost exactly the same way. So there you go. So I guess Mamet was an even bigger influence than I thought.
Well, you mentioned that sweet spot, and that's actually what I was kind of thinking about, because a lot of times when you have these movies that are very driven by dialogue, the dialogue becomes almost a character in itself, and sometimes it's overwhelming, but with your film, it's so well balanced. It just feels like an organic conversation. How did you really let that flow so naturally and make it a film and not a stage play?
Well, I think, some of it is just intuitive. I mean, some of it in the writing was that on the one hand, because it's a movie, you don't want any fat. You don't want any dialogue that doesn't need to be there. But on the other hand, you want it to feel natural. And people in life, not everything they say is profound and meaningful. So you have to find this balance where, it's the right amount of the two of them talking about really weighty, heavy duty issues in their lives. And then also these kind of digressions where they're talking about what they're eating or movies or TV or whatever it is. And some of that's just kind of intuitive. You just kind of feel it on the page where it needs that rhythm. A lot of it comes from the acting. In terms of it being cinematic, part of it too was sort of built in to the design by my cinematographer, Roberto Correa, and I. We tried to kind of break the movie up. So basically, as the movie goes along, the camera work kind of evolves along with the characters. As the characters kind of loosen up, expose more of their emotions, and also as they get a little bit drunker, the camera in a way gets a little bit drunker. It becomes a little less, rigid in terms of the framing and things like that. So the whole idea was sort of to have whatever the camera was doing reflect what the characters are doing, but also be kind of sparing with certain things like extreme close-ups. The movie, even though it's heavily dialogue driven, it's more medium shots and two shots and things like that than extreme close-ups. I really tried to wait until the scene where John and Lea are really kind of confessing how deeply the breakup of their marriage affected them and how much they lost. It's kind of at the end of the second act. That was really that I tried to save the camera going in really tight on them, and them sort of looking into the lens, almost like a Jonathan Demme close-up from Silence of the Lambs or something. Tried to save that until a really important moment. So, I mean, that part of it too. And then again, part of it's just the acting. I mean, I think that, when people say something cinematic, often they mean a sort of De Palma Steadicam shot or something like that. But cinematic can also be a very tight gesture or look or something like that, because that's something you can't do on the stage in quite the same way. I mean, people often ask me if this was ever intended as a stage play, and it wasn't. I mean, you could do it on the stage, but I actually think what makes the movie work would, in a sense, be lost because you wouldn't have that intimacy.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I have to ask, because as a writer myself and somebody who loves movies, what was your reaction when you realized that Roger Ebert had given you such a glowing review?
In a way, sort of the highlight of the entire experience, because, for a few reasons. One of which is that, I grew up in Chicago. where, when I was a kid, Siskel and Ebert, that was where I initially really learned about how to think about movies. Basically, my evolution as a film viewer kind of mirrored the rise of Siskel and Ebert as major cultural forces. I mean, I still remember the first episode I ever saw of Siskel and Ebert's TV show when they were on PBS, and it was called Sneak Previews, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm a Chicago girl. I watched it too.
Yeah, and I still remember the first episode I ever saw. I was a little kid. I mean, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they reviewed Animal House. And I remember thinking, man, I really want to see that movie. And of course, my parents would not take me to see it, but I remember seeing them review it, and I basically grew up watching their review show, reading their print reviews. For a lot, when I was in high school, Ebert used to put this book out every year, the Roger Ebert's Movie Home Companion, that would kind of compile a lot of his reviews and things. So it's not really an exaggeration to say that Roger Ebert was a bigger influence on me as a filmmaker than anyone else, any other director, any other critic, whatever. He was the person who really taught me to start looking at movies seriously. And he was a major, major influence on me. That was one of the last movies he reviewed before he died was, Trouble with the Truth played in Chicago in early 2013, I guess, right before he died. And it was incredible. I mean, it was sort of like my fantasy my whole life was getting a positive review from Roger Ebert. One of the reasons that I'm grateful to you for doing this with Lea and I and helping get the word out is, we have absolutely no marketing budget or anything like that. I mean, when I was talking earlier about, the advantages of low budget independent filmmaking, that you get to make the movie you want and all that. The disadvantage is once you've made it, it's very hard to get it seen and to compete with, all the movies that have bigger marketing budgets and bigger stars and all that kind of thing. The Roger Ebert review, whenever I, get depressed about the fact that the movie hasn't necessarily found the audience I would like it to, or things like that, I kind of go online and, reread that Roger Ebert review. It keeps me comforted on the cold, lonely nights when I, get depressed about my career or whatever. I kind of think, well, Roger Ebert, he liked it. And it does mean a lot. I mean, it means a lot to me when anybody likes it. It means a lot to me when anybody even takes the time to watch it. But yeah, that was really a high point in the whole process for sure.
Well, and that makes me wonder, I mean, you call yourself a film enthusiast. Being this involved in filmmaking, directing films, going through the process of distribution and all of that, has it altered your enthusiasm in any way?
That's a great question. I think if anything, the movies I like, I probably love even more because I just know how damn hard it is. I think probably having made them, I'm probably a little, if anything, I probably like movies more than I ever have. I think I get, again, I'm certainly more forgiving of my fellow directors than I used to be. I think anytime I see a movie that's good, I know how much work it is just to make a bad movie. And I still, nothing has really killed my enthusiasm. I still get the same excitement. It's funny. I went and saw Wonder Woman yesterday. I've really been I felt really burnt out on comic book movies. I really thought I was sick of them and done with them. And then I went and saw Wonder Woman and I loved it. And I felt the same charge watching that movie yesterday that I felt when I was 8 years old and I saw the Blues Brothers, or when I was 20 years old and saw Goodfellas, or whatever. I mean, I still have that capacity to be churned on by a movie, I think, as ever. And I actually think, if anything, making them has made that, I think it's intensified it even more.
I can see the passion that you have for what you're doing, and I can't wait to see what you make next. So before we wrap this up, Jim, where can people see Trouble with the Truth?
It's streaming on Amazon Prime right now. So if you have Prime, you can actually watch it for free. And Amazon also has, if you're a physical media person, you can get it on DVD, and the DVD's got a commentary track by Lea and I and some interviews and things like that. And then if you don't have Amazon, it's on iTunes and Vudu, and you can get the DVD pretty much any place that sells DVDs online, like Barnes & Noble or Walmart or whatever. So anyway, yeah, but I think Amazon Prime is probably the best way to find it the cheapest. So Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, you take care.
Okay, you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.